And all right, we are recording, I believe.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone, and I hope you have a chance to watch this meeting recording. We are here with Kari O'Connell, who is the PI of the U-FERN RCN and UBE, which we've asked you guys all to read some of their materials in preparation for our upcoming workshop. And Kari has very kindly agreed to spend some time with us today just to kind of help us orient our activities with U-FERN, given the potential overlap and opportunity for collaboration, but also to kind of help us identify a distinct space as we move forward with planning where we're going with our RCN group. So thank you again, Kari. And to get started, could you just give us a brief overview of U-FERN, and then particularly since you guys just came out of your workshop last week, what's the momentum that you have at this point?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, James. So U-FERN, first I'll start with saying the acronym. It's Undergraduate Field Experiences Research Network. That's what that stands for. And as you might guess, that the major goal, since it is an RCN, UBE, is to develop a network, one that focuses on improving undergraduate field education pretty broadly. I would say that will be a focus of our conversation today, that we're focusing on maybe a higher level look than RiVER might be thinking about. So that's like the broad focus. The RCN came from, and this is pivotal kind of where we're going, from the field stations and marine labs community, broadly like Organization of Biological Field Stations, OBFS, and NAML, National Association of Marine Labs. Both organizations did a lot of planning and even had an NRC report come out of NSF around the value of field stations. And so some of the people approached our center where I work at the Center for Research on Lifelong STEM Learning at Oregon State University, about joining with them as social scientists to help think about improving undergraduate field education. So at the heart of our RCN is pulling together those communities. So in our RCN, we have undergraduate field educators, definitely focused on the biology side. It kind of came from that, biological field sciences, but also including geosciences, and then and not just field educators who work at field stations and marine labs, also ones who do van by the side of the road, as one of our co-PIs like to say, like geology field trip. We're including that in our conversation. And then social scientists are a key part of our network. So people who focus on undergraduate STEM education, environmental education, kind of place-based, people who focus on place-based education, and focusing on understanding what happens around transformative experiences for students broadly. And then another kind of arm is people focusing on broadening participation, and that may be with a research lens, like a social science research lens, or people who work with groups of students, say like historically Black colleges and universities in ecology, for example. So that is who we've included in our network, and that interdisciplinary aspect of the social science and the field educators, people who teach field courses, people who are directors of research experience for undergraduates. That's the core of our focus. And we've laid out 4 objectives for achieving our really broad vision of improving undergraduate field education. And they focus, 1, on identifying, modifying, maybe even creating assessment tools that can be used both to foster research and improvement of reflection back into the system for improving undergraduate field education, fostering communities of practice or undergraduate field educators to develop and share evidence-based practices around field education, thinking about broadening participation and what the promise of hands-on learning in these field experiences holds for broadening participation, but also the potential barrier that presents. Really, and then the last, and something we really focused on for this most recent meeting, was developing, basically building the network as a kind of living laboratory, or taking advantage of that network to look at research about undergraduate field experiences. And a couple things, I guess, that are like really core themes. One is a lot of the work we're doing is really thinking about student-centered learning in the terms of the evidence-based practices we're working on together and sharing. Well, working on identifying, I would say, and then that is really how we can bring in the inclusive learning, the broadening participation aspect. That's like a real kind of theme, I think, through everything that we're trying to do. And the other point I want to make, an important kind of definition, is we're talking about undergraduate field experiences, but I want to make it really clear that we're thinking about undergraduate field learning experiences. So ones that have a structure to them that focuses on learning and personal growth for students. So for people who are, say, hiring undergraduates to be their field crew for the summer, we're not really talking about including that in our network. Not that things couldn't be taken and learned and apply in that situation, but that's not what we're talking about. So, right. And really the whole thing started with this idea of this transformative 10-week-long research experience at a field station, like Rocky Mountain Biological Lab or whatever. That's like our cream of the crop. But a lot happened. Right. It became clear, we can't just think about that. We've got to be thinking about the whole gamut. But again, we're still mostly talking about field courses, research experiences, REUs. And REUs, and possibly field trips, kind of how that all fits together. So I think the last kind of important thing for people to understand is we're at the beginning of year 3 of our project. And we didn't have an incubator, although we sure could have used one. So I think it's a great opportunity you all have in front of you. Although I think there was a lot of work done, again, by the field stations and marine labs community before this that was pivotal in making this happen. So that kind of served almost like an incubator-like thing. It's the pulling in the social scientists that was the really, really new part for this.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Kari, I have, this is Andy Rose. Yeah. Just for clarification, you at one point you said we had 4 objectives. Mm-hmm. It was real clear, the creating assessment tools. Mm-hmm. Do you mind kind of bulleting what 2, 3, 4 are?
Yeah, I don't mind. I probably kind of wave my hands around them. I'm actually going to go to our website, Andy. Okay. I don't have them like exactly memorized, and they're really big. You know, I look at them and I'm like, really? I'll be honest. And we've refined them since the proposal. Let's see, just so I can literally, and just for you all in the future, Andy, I think hopefully you have access to all our stuff from our meeting, right. But that first presentation I gave the very first night has like the stuff that I said, like super well outlined in like 4 or 5 slides. Gotcha. So like the first one was about, and I had it wrong as far as what comes first, but identify and share evidence-based models and practices for engaging a diverse range of undergraduates in effective field and marine learning experiences. And the second one is identify, modify, develop, and share assessment tools for understanding the impact of field and marine learning experiences on undergraduate student learning, STEM identity, and career trajectories. Third, investigate how undergraduate field experiences can be more inclusive and attract and serve students from different ethnic and racial groups and with physical disabilities. We actually added that one after we pulled in some people on that, who are currently underrepresented in field-based sciences, such as marine science, ecology, and geosciences. And then the fourth one, harness the power of a network of programs that provide undergraduate field learning experiences to do research on student learning and contribute our findings to the broader body of evidence about undergraduate STEM learning. So that's like, I literally read them.
That's great.
Exact.
So would it be fair to say that, because it sounds like, because in some of our conversations, I think just because of the way that the conversations went, I became really intrigued by some of the, frankly, almost like primary research that you guys were interested in doing to sort of like, do these approaches, really work? And going further, saying like, well, maybe that's too much of a blanket. Like sometimes they do work and some things do work. And so how can we better figure out which are the things that work in these contexts? So really try to, create the scholarship around, that aspect of education to make it more effective, and to, I think probably given who your stakeholders are, provide some evidence, additional evidence, because they're obviously invested in this kind of thing. But it sounds like from, going through that list again, there's also this component of the community of practice. So practicing, sort of boots on the ground, helping people who are doing this kind of thing do it better, providing them resources, connecting them, giving them opportunities to share experiences to make, what one school is doing better. So there are both elements to that to U-FERN, would you say?
I would say that, and I think you summarized it very well in your first thing about, really developing the scholarship. And I think the thing to emphasize, all of these are enormous, as you can see. Yeah. I think the thing to emphasize in particular with the development of communities of practice, I would say we're just kind of starting on that part of it now, because we haven't, and it's not that all the evidence needs to come from our network. It also needs to come from all over the place, from all the other stuff that's done. But what we're really trying to focus on, I'm actually being very careful not to say the word best practices, because who decides their best practices? So I like to say evidence-based practices, show some evidence. And I think evidence can come from a group of practitioners. I don't think that that's something to ignore, but that's really what we're focused on is that part, and providing some evidence and providing, well, I don't know if Andy told you, but I think the biggest product we've had so far that was, I think, very well received at the network meeting was developing this framework. That's what I presented at ESA, James, at our poster, for thinking about all that, because it's super complicated. But a lot of the research has been done. It just maybe hasn't all been done in these kinds of experiences, but there are National Research Council reports up the wazoo about how people learn. And so all we did with that framework was pull a lot of that together in one place. And then a big thing we'll be doing moving forward that I think you all could easily be involved in is putting some, trying that framework out and thinking and developing some case studies that are varieties of field learning experiences to see if this kind of thinking can be useful. Can it lead to research? Can it lead to people being reflective about what they're doing? And because we pulled it together all in one place, that feels hopefully kind of familiar and pulls in some of the really distinctive aspects of field learning. And that hasn't been done before, as far as we know, that is a resource and a helpful thing for people on the ground, but also people doing scholarship and research.
Great. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a little bit of a segue there. So the next thing that I was going to ask you was, given what you know about us, recognizing that we're actually just getting started ourselves, and so even we don't necessarily know ourselves all that well, where we'll be 12 months from now and so forth. And you probably understand that better than we do. What are some areas that you see as areas of overlap, and what are some areas that you see as being distinct, sort of moving at this point?
What was the last part you said, James? I lost that.
Where are we where does the U-FERN and the RiVER group sort of already overlap? But, given where we're at now, where are we and you distinct? What are the distinctions and the overlaps areas?
Oh, distinctions. Okay, thanks. That was a word I couldn't quite catch. Areas of overlap. I have a lot to learn still about your RCN, and I'm just going to say right now, and I told this to Andy too, be kind to yourself about not knowing yet. That was the hardest part for a lot of my co-PIs in particular. in the not knowing, but yet, I mean, just it's to be figured out, and it's about facilitation to make that happen. But I think there's overlaps. One, I already mentioned, like, I think there's opportunities to take some of the resources and tools we're developing and apply it in the distinctive field learning situation that Rivers is representing. So I think that's a great, easy, low-hanging fruit. I think Andy has, I'm thinking, a lot of ideas about that from being at the meeting. And so, yeah, and I think the other one that we haven't talked about yet today is moving forward with the project group really focused on mentoring and providing mentoring training that's particularly applicable to field-based situations. And that really is focused a lot on the REU, research experience for undergraduates, and their like definition of mentoring is not the same thing as like advising about like career necessarily or teaching, but there's a lot that can be overlap. So I think that's another area that as that work moves forward, because we're gonna try to potentially go for either a supplement to our grant or a special different workshop grant from NSF to fund that. And I think it would be a win-win for both of our projects to include interest from your group if that's possible. So that's another one that's just right off the top of my head. I want to say easy. Yeah, I mean, we had these project groups that ended up being, you know, I feel like successful from the meeting. And one of them also that I think Andy spent time in was a group looking at empathy in undergraduate field experiences. That would be one, pulling together some kind of different, I'm gonna say, like, because I feel like we have some things that are like way up here and some things that are, you know, at this much smaller scale.
Yeah.
And that would be one that might be at a much smaller scale that would potentially, you know, interact with something you all are thinking about. I'm sure there's other things, and I've been thinking about them. Let me just talk a little about what I think might be distinctive, and then we'll just see what I might have missed. I think my understanding is that your group definitely has a focus and conversation about risk assessment and safety. And not that that is not important to the people in U-FERN, it definitely is, and it comes up, but it just hasn't been something we're focusing on a lot. And I feel like it might be in a more important focus in your group, and I think that would be one way to distinguish, but yet potentially, you know, people from U-FERN would be interested in those conversations too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I saw that someone sent out the Fleischner et al. Paper in bioscience. If you haven't connected with Tom Fleischner, he thinks about that stuff a lot, and he'd be a good person to connect with. And maybe you already have, but if you haven't, I would say connect with him for sure. The other one, well, again, this is just, I was thinking of ideas for your group, so maybe this is either distinctive or not. Something that, you know, there's some communities of social scientists who we haven't reached out to yet. They've been kind of on my list, but my list is very long. And that you might explore is like people studying tourism and recreation. And I frankly think it has even stronger connections to what you're talking about possibly. I think there's connections and overlap in both of our projects. And I haven't made those connections. You know, I have some people on my list who people have mentioned, but I haven't done that work.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic because it does intertwine with even the risk assessment piece. Some of the schools have sort of pursued routes where essentially, you know, the way that they put on a course, one model is that you actually, you have, you know, a company that does rafting, and or some sort of river, could be rafting, could be whatever it is, but you basically have an outdoor recreation vendor who facilitates your course. But also part of the way that they're facilitating is not only by sort of getting folks down the river, but they're also taking on that some of the risk assessment responsibilities, and also in some cases the liability aspect of that as well. So it's definitely it's not an uncommon model, and in fact, even at VCU, we've kind of, you know, some courses that's turned out, some courses we sort of do in-house, but in other cases it's we go with the vendors, and that also kind of wraps up with the permitting issues with access to certain river landscapes. Sometimes because universities are inherently groups, an individual might be able to go down as an individual recreational boater, but if you're going to take a class down it, then that starts pushing you into either having an educational permit or sort of piggybacking on a recreational permit, but then that puts you back into the communication with the commercial vendors. So that's an interesting space to think about.
Yeah, I thought about it. I think another, I'm kind of mixing the two, like overlap and distinctive. Just following up even more on one of the first things I mentioned as far as like trying out the U-FERN framework. I mean, this will just be, I want to say deeper, but when we put that framework together, it's broad. And I told people at ESA, like, I have put a National Research Council report into one table. And it's not, we hope it gets used for design of field courses, for example, but it's not necessarily super well set up for that right now. Like, we tried so hard with the language and vocabulary, and I'm a boundary spanner, having lived in both worlds that represented by the RCN. But like, I talked some ideas with Andy about, say, using Stella, and there's like, I would love to see some kind of, potentially, if it makes sense, a tool, a planning tool, a reflection tool, something to come out of it that makes it more user-friendly. And I think that's something that we can literally work on together, potentially. And there is a group kind of working in the scalability, and I think that's like the first step, and then there might even be like this other one out there. But the other thing, I guess, and I don't know whether this is distinctive, overlap, I don't really know, is this focus on broadening participation. And I bring up the recreation and tourism connection because one of my co-PIs, Gillian Bowser, who wasn't able to be at the network meeting, she was the one who suggested pulling in that group. She does a lot of work at national parks, and she just thought, okay, if we're trying to attract a diverse group of students to be involved in these undergraduate field experiences, there's just many places where we need to do work. But one of them is the attract, frankly, and to be thinking about kind of different models for that. And that's where the tourism and recreation kind of idea came from. And some advice I'd given to Andy is just, we want broadening participation to be a major focus of our work. And actually, I feel like we're doing okay on that. I would say the people at our most recent network meeting were very white. And I'm kind of bummed about that, but we actually have a lot of non-whites involved in other ways. And I think like mentoring focus is a way to really move the kind of window on that. But I just encourage you all to think from the very beginning about how to involve some groups, if it's some people from tribal colleges or HBCUs. I mean, I'll be honest, when we wrote our U-FERN proposal, like 3 weeks before it was due at the most, we pulled in Gillian Bowser, our African-American co-PI. Who's done a lot of RCNs and actually provides some wonderful expertise. She's not super engaged like in all our project groups, but she provides some very important kinds of things. But it takes a lot of work to like form relationship, and those people are really busy. But if you can like really think of a way to do it from the beginning, then I highly recommend that.
Yeah, that's good advice. It's hard. I think we're like, one of the challenges there is like finding the right people. I feel like the spirit is willing for a lot of movement on that, but part of the problem, one of the problems created by the phenomenon of underrepresentation is there aren't that many people who are already involved who would be interested in this, and those that are super highly sought after. So
we found the same thing, James. It's been a struggle. I mean, some of what I've done as a PI is really accept and manage the way those people, I don't even want to say that, those people, that sounds terrible, the people who can represent the underrepresented, the people who really think about that a lot, those people who get asked to do so many things. I'm trying to kind of basically work around the ways they can contribute, which are not necessarily in the same ways that other people can. That's what I'm doing. Whether that's like a good way to go, I don't know. But like I said, I have a co-PI who is really busy and hasn't been able to be involved as much in our network meetings, but she pulled in several African-American ecologists at our ESA session this summer. And she did that. So I am just saying, great. I'm going to facilitate you to do those things when you can. So that's how we're dealing with it. But I just encourage you.
It'll be interesting to see how it shakes out.
Go ahead.
In our workshop, in the sense, I mean, I think that I think there are sort of broad ways to tackle that issue, but then there might also be some more focused ones. And it'll be interesting. Some of our participants that are coming to this first workshop have connections with the indigenous community, Native American communities, and have worked with them. And there's a lot of I think there's kind of trying. They have some projects that are focused around integrating sort of tribal knowledge around natural resource issues in sort of companion with sort of more traditional Western science approaches. So it'd be interesting to see what they bring to the table, as well as, here in the Southeast, of course, we have the opportunity to connect with, a number of historically Black colleges which are close by. And then some have expressed interest in partnering, but their responsibilities are really numerous, and so it's hard to get involved with
the other one I would explore, which I feel like is an untapped thing that we just haven't had time to do as much, is connections to community colleges. If you can find some connections to those folks, I mean, they are not, the numbers of undergraduates that they work with, it's staggering. It's a huge amount, and that is definitely connecting to broadening participation. And this is something that I think is like the distinctive parts of the RCNs we're talking about, and RiVER's looking at a much more tightly focused kind of type of experience and content area. And so there might be more room to work with some really specific kind of examples of successful, because we have some of those in our network, but we're starting in these papers we'll put out, we'll have these case studies that we want to bring that in. But for example, Ian Billick, who was pivotal in starting all this and is now no longer involved just because of his time element. He's director at Rocky Mountain Biological Lab. He has set up amazing partnerships with community college in Los Angeles. And it's not just like, oh, I know you and you recruit. It is like they design their research experience around the needs of these community colleges. They bring community college instructors out to that field station to help them feel comfortable with the whole thing before they ever ask them to recruit their students. Anyway, I think there's some really, if you could find a really good example like that, or try one out or something, anyway, I think that could be really cool.
Great. Andy, anything to jump in on that one, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with what Kari's saying. I got some other places, so we can expanding on some of the places that Kari was talking about. But I probably can share those face to face with everybody else, so we can save this time for shares.
Okay. Yeah, and thanks, Andy. I was going to actually look to you and say, I'm sure I'm missing something from the meeting. You know what? Your ideas. I bet you'll have some really good ideas that I haven't thought of.
Yeah, but you hit on those, so I think we're good.
Okay.
So I think we have kind of covered some of this. So, but I'll bring up the question, and maybe I'll mention what I've heard, and you can sort of say, yeah, that's what I was saying, or not, and then we can kind of elaborate from there. But the question I had was, from your perspective, what are the most obvious or exciting opportunities for collaboration between our groups? And then related to that was, if there are things that would be exciting to collaborate with, is there anything that you would like us to consider or discuss, as we start out with our meeting this week? And I guess this it is, some of the low-hanging fruit ideas that you mentioned might be, opportunities for collaboration. You mentioned the, what's the right word? The model, the template, the guideline,
framework.
The framework. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and the vocabulary just gets insane, you know, around that, but that's what we're calling it.
So in the sense that we're, you know, a more focused subgroup of, or a focused subgroup of field experiences, you know, we could implement some of these practices and be kind of a guinea pig / test case for, like, does this stuff actually, like, how does this all play out in this particular context, and so forth. But so so that one, and then the other that I thought I heard you say as an area that we might be a little more invested in sort of up front was this sort of risk assessment and sort of where that might lead, also kind of spinning into the ecotourism connections and the scholarship behind that, as well as the, you know, the private sphere connections as well. So those were two areas that I thought you've already kind of outlined might be some overlapping interest. Does that kind of summarize, or are there some other things that, you know, you see as, when I use the word collaborate together, like what are some things that we could, I guess another way of reframing that question is, you know, previous questions were more about, you know, where do we overlap and where are we distinct? I guess in its highest form, this question would be, you know, what are things that we might be able, if there are any, or to start to think about this anyway, what are some things that we could accomplish together that you wouldn't do by your own and we wouldn't do by our own, but by teaming up together, you know, we could, are there, you know, start to think about that kind of space.
I do think the other one that I had mentioned that might be worthy of discussion is the mentoring piece.
Right.
And you can let me know, like, oh, that doesn't seem relevant, and that's fine. But I do think that is a place that we could collaborate. Now, we have a lot of momentum behind doing that, I want to say on our own. But I think it can be strengthened by doing it together. We don't have the funding source entirely figured out yet. So we will be working on that. And
so
if
I'm,
for
when you say
example,
mentoring,
go ahead. Yeah.
So when you say mentoring, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just can you elaborate on what you, because mentoring by a, you know, mentoring of the undergraduate, not, or mentoring of advisors to be better mentorers, or sort of all of that.
So actually, Kari, would you mind if I step in here for a little bit, and then I'll let you take.
Go for it. Yeah.
So James, this is where I think this is pretty fertile ground for both of us, and I think this gets to your point where is this an area where we could both collaborate on this?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're looking at the safety considerations because of the inherent and perceived risks involved with river trips, but embedded in that is becoming more and more clear that there's a social and emotional component to the safety that more or less has been underattended to across the board. And this kind of goes into that empathy group that Kari was making reference to. If you talk to people who work in safety, risk management, field officer type stuff, most of the stuff that they're dealing with, it's not broken ankles and sprained wrists. It's about emotional, social complaints and concerns. So those types of considerations are huge. And they're becoming mental health issues, right? Like those sorts of things are just enormous. And the practitioners are not trained. So how do you deal with that? And in that context, the mentoring thing, I think, is providing a real healthy way to start exploring those types of things. So I think I really see that as an area where both our two RCNs could make some headway that really supports each other, because I think there's a lot of work to be done in that world.
Cool. Well, that sounds exciting.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. That was great. You summarized it really well. What I was I'm looking through some shared files right now, and I can't find them this second, but like Danielle Zollner, the woman who presented about mentoring at our network meeting, actually has a definition exactly, which I think is helpful in the situation, but I can't find it right away. But I'm glad to send it afterwards. And that's where the thing was, she literally kind of says, like, it's not just advising on, like, say, courses. And we're working with a partnership with a group called Center for, it's CIMER, C-I-M-E-R, at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I just can't remember what they stand for right now. Something, Center for Something, Mentor Something Relationships. And one of our co-PIs leads up that center, and she and several other people she worked with entirely focus on mentoring and research around mentoring. And they have a curriculum called Entering Mentoring, which has been supported primarily through NIH all these years, but has a lot of evidence behind it. They've done a lot of research, and as far as an evidence-based practice, that definitely kind of fits the bill. So we have someone in our group, Danielle Zollner, who's trained in that, and we're talking about how can we create case studies and a training for that that has the field component, so those issues that Andy brought up specifically in it. And I think as far as selling it, I think it particularly focuses on mentoring undergraduates in STEM research. But what we know from our landscape study is that almost all these field courses have research components. It's STEM, it's very focused on STEM, and that mentoring can transfer to graduate students, for example, absolutely. It's the same concept, and it's a lot about building a community, developing a mentoring plan that's specific to your situation. And we've now been at Organization of Biological Field Stations meeting and presented, and it's not presenting, it's not talking, it's like inspiring lots of conversations among the peers to come up with ideas to deal with things that Andy was talking about. So that's a little more about that.
Great. Well, Andy, I look forward to you sharing that with the group once we get together and we can explore that some more.
Yeah, and Andy, let me know if you can't find any of the files. I thought we have all the PowerPoints from our network meeting uploaded on the participant drive. So maybe just make sure you have access, and if not, send me an email with an exclamation point and I'll help out.
You bet.
Great. So the last thing that I think I'd love to touch on with you, Kari, is sort of a little bit more kind of nuts and bolts and kind of, so we're an incubator, we've got this sort of opportunity now to spend the next year kind of, bring a vision, but, which will be articulated in a proposal. And so I guess, one would be sort of at the sort of larger scales, like, having, although I appreciate you weren't an incubator, but you have sort of gone through the process of developing a successful RCN-UBE, any advice to us on how to sort of go forward with that in a successful way? And then more specifically then kind of thinking about strategically, I suppose, given that we do have the potential for appearing to overlap in what we're interested in, thoughts about whether that's going to be a problem for us as we go forward or not, or, any thoughts about how to handle that, or whether that's even an issue at all from your perspective.
Well, a few things for sure. I have thoughts about all of that. As far as a successful RCN proposal, I'll say I'm proud that our RCN-UBE got all excellence at NSF, which
that's great.
I was just blown away. So that was super exciting. And I think the key to our success was some of the timing of the issue. And we had, and a program officer told me this too later, we had quotes from a National Research Council report that was about the field stations and marine labs that had been commissioned specifically, and we literally called that out in the first page of our proposal. This is why we're writing this proposal. And I talked to one of my program officers I talked to a lot. I'm part of the long-term ecological research network. So it wasn't necessarily the program officer reviewed this proposal, but he's like, you'd be amazed at how few people who actually do that. So anyway, that was just one thing that helped. The other, I think, is it is about developing a network. So you have to make a case that you're developing a new network. And I think we made a really good case for that. And so I just recommend, and it's not to say it's hard. I mean, you can do it. You just have to be very upfront about that. And that needs to be right at the beginning and why, and they say all this in the RFP, but I just can't, I guess, say that enough. And I haven't been involved in the review process yet. I've just been too busy. I just keep getting asked every year and saying no. But the other is I got emails this year for people asking, from the program officer saying, share this opportunity with your colleagues. So I do think if you write a decent proposal, you have a decent chance of getting funded. Because let me tell you, I don't get that from the other places at NSF that I submit.
Yeah.
And that's a lot. Like I submit a lot of NSF proposals. So anyway, so I think that's in your favor. You know, I mean, and I think there's some elements, and this is even more nuts and bolts, like you want to think about making sure you have an evaluation plan for your proposal. It doesn't have to be a huge one. Like I think I was telling Andy, NSF's bar for that is way lower than like my bar would be, because our group does evaluation. Like we have millions of dollars to do evaluation for NASA projects. So we're pretty into it. Like we wanted to do a whole research proposal that would have cost as much as RCN. We had to hold ourselves back. But anyway, so that's just something small. And I will try to dig up. Weirdly enough, I lost it. I had the program officer send me like a 3-page thing about here are some advice about how to write a good RCN proposal. And some of the things I just said were in it, but I'll try to find that again. And I use that. And some of it was, it's got to be mostly participant support. Although we did put in funding, we're soft money all over our center. So we actually put in more funding for ourselves than I thought they would come back from NSF and ask us to move it, but they didn't. So that was like, I want to say a learning. And then I was telling Andy, and I think it's in my beginning intro PowerPoint, Andy, that I gave the first night, there are a few references to actually the development of networks and how we use evidence-based practices around developing networks. I think that helped.
So even sort of like the evidence about how to go about forming a network.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, so, and I felt like our proposal was a little open on exactly our planned activities compared to some of the other RCNs I've seen, but they seemed okay with that. You know, we talked about developing and how we would develop some of the exact activities by the network, but I think the fact that we had like a paragraph about using evidence-based practices of developing a network. I have colleagues who focus on that for their entire area of research. So I was able to lean on them, you know, to say, tell me your top 3 sources. And I'm glad to give you those references. If you can't find them, just let me know.
Okay.
I'm trying to think what else. I think most of the other stuff was just like basic. NSF proposal. Oh, I mean, I've told you that, like bringing in the broadening participation and diversity as much as you can. I think that's key to the proposal writing process, and having your network represented in your leadership team and steering committee, you know, I mean, I think pretty basic stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then as far as like overlap and how that might cause a problem or not, I mean, I can't totally answer that, I guess, but and part of it was, and Andy saw this, like we are just starting to talk about like what our next steps are. Are we going to try to write another RCN? For sure, I'm hopefully going to be working on I cannot remember what that stands for, but something undergraduate education. So undergraduate education research program at NSF, but that will be for like a specific research project that maybe some of the people and sites and work that you're all doing could be a part of down the road, but that'll be different. That's not sustaining a network. That's a specific research project that will come out of the RCN. So, but I think in any proposal you all write, making a clear distinction, that basically identifying some of these things we've talked about, being like, this is going to build on, but not repeat, you know, what U-FERN is doing. So but then I think you will need to have like a substantial body that is different, or I think it could be a problem. So I feel like at least the things that I mentioned, you had mentioned, James, that group that's almost like a certification, or I can't.
The RiVER Studies Certificate.
Yeah, program. Like that's really, we're not doing anything at that level at all, you know? So I think those are areas that you're gonna want to go. And I think then the other is at some point in the process, in fact, twice in the process, I would say, talk to the program officers about it. And you know, and ask them, because I think they want good proposals and they will give you advice. And even invite the program officer to your meeting in May. I had the last program officer come to our first network meeting. It's really too bad I couldn't get them to come to this one, because this one was way better. But he was still very impressed with the diversity of people there. So I think that's what they're excited about. So
that's an interesting idea. I wouldn't have thought of that. That's helpful. There's some good stuff there. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and actually, while we're on this one, Kari, can I ask you a couple questions specific to those pieces of advice? First of all.
Yeah, exactly. And then I have another meeting in like 5 minutes. I'm really sorry, but go ahead, go for it.
Yeah, I'll keep them real quick. You said, of course, building a new network. Question for you: how critical is including different disciplines and maybe even people who aren't in academia, stretching out that transcends academia? How critical is that?
I want to say I don't know. I mean, we didn't go for people who transcend academia. That just wasn't our focus. But I think the most important is that you can identify, here's our problem that we want to work on, and we need a network to solve it. And the network is going to include these groups of people who were not a network before. And if you can make a strong case for that, then I think doing like bringing in people who are not in academia, I think that's fine and great. You know, we were able to make the case with the multiple disciplines, but there are lots of ways to make that case, I think. Was that helpful?
Very, yep.
Okay.
Question about an evaluation plan. Is the evaluation plan more for the project or for the product?
Well, it could be both. If you have a clear product that you want to develop, you could actually evaluate the product. Like, do people use it? Do they find it useful? What ways might we improve it? Like, that could be an iterative process throughout your RCN. For example, if we work together on a planning tool product from the U-FERN framework, we would want to use evaluation to learn and iterate to improve. But you want to have a program evaluation. Literally someone who at least has some external something, is not totally like one of you saying they are working to achieve these objectives of their proposal. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Does that help?
That's great.
Yeah.
I think we should let you go to your next meeting, Kari.
Yeah, probably. I'm writing an NSF proposal, so wish me luck. That's why I'm not at your meeting, which I just got to get this out there so everyone can hear it. I am a rafter myself.
Excellent.
And like to spend a lot of time on rivers, and it was really hard for me to say no to your invitation.
Next time.
I had to, my family was going to kill me.
Well, thank you so much for taking some time, as you're clearly juggling lots of stuff right now. But that's really helpful, and we'll share this with our community as we get started on our process towards creating our network. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, best of luck to you all. I loved working with Andy. It was so great to have him. I've had several people who have RCNs be really generous with me. So I'm glad to be generous whenever I can find the time as far as helping you all. And anyway, good luck, and don't hesitate to reach out again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye. Good luck. Have a great meeting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Oh, there's Matthew. Did you just arrive? Matthew.
Hey, Matt.
Hey.
Sorry, unmuting there. No, I've been here for like 30 minutes, so I caught most of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
No, it was good. No,
you just now popped up on my screen, so I didn't know.
Oh, that's funny. I don't know why I wasn't there earlier. That's so interesting.
Well, that was really her to share some time with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it seemed like Kari's very valuable resource, and yeah, she